Welcome to The Real Heal. I am your host, Dr. Renee Wallenstein, also known as the Libidoologist. So if you're ready, let's get into it. Andrea, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here. Like I was saying in the conversation before, I feel like I found my person.
Yes, I know. And, what we're going to talk about today is just so important for, for overall health and wellness. It's like that global overview of everything. A little spoiler alert, because now we'll get into it eventually. But before we do, just tell us who you are and how you got doing what you're doing today.
Right. So, I first thank you so much for bringing me here. I'm a pharmacist by trade, 30 years. This is my 30th year as a pharmacist. And though, even when I tell people I'm a pharmacist, I have not dispensed a medication or worked in a traditional pharmacy, what most people identify as what pharmacists do I want to say it's been almost 20 years now. And so I've shifted full-time over to patient advocacy. And so as a patient advocate, I broadly work with healthcare navigation and decision support. And so I bring in that knowledge of 30 years of the medical field, particularly the problem-solving skills that pharmacists excel at, that understanding of the medications and the tools, as well as what the systems look like and do they support optimal wellness. I spent a lot of time in long-term care, skilled nursing, hospice, palliative care, end of life. And so really that's the last 15 years has been in the geriatric space. And I think a lot of people don't really know that space until they're in the crisis and the chaos of a medical situation. And what you don't know can be a problem, particularly at that time of our life. I mean, it can always be a problem, but particularly if we're older, and have a number of challenges going on at the same time.
Got it. Yeah. So it's best to learn these when you can. Anytime that is, but sooner the better, right?
Exactly. I like to be able to peel kind of the curtain back and say this, because if you think about what happens when we age, particularly in the United States, the days of caring for family at home, for most of us, that just doesn't happen. My dad had dementia, lived in assisted living. Had I not known what assisted living, versus skilled nursing versus long-term care, what these different terms meant, I would have been completely unprepared. And so I think that through the work that I do, my hope is to be able to peel that curtain back and say, look, this is the situation, this is the environment. And how do we best prepare ourselves? And it doesn't have to be, a lot of people think, oh, I'll worry about that when I'm 80. I can tell you, I started thinking about it at 40 once I saw that space, because how we live now will influence what happens downstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm going through that right now. We're just about ready to help my dad transition into assisted care, assisted living. And, I've gone through that whole power of attorney thing. And I was like, wow, there's a lot that goes into thank God he did that, because there's a trust and there's a this. And I was like, oh my gosh, all these things you don't even know. But when you get to that point where you're starting to have memory loss, he's 81, now, I'm having to, he has memory and he has decision-making capabilities, but it's variable. It's teetering. So knowing, and he had that wherewithal before, it's like, okay, this is all that has to be put in place. And now he can help me and my sisters make a decision where he wants to go, hopefully. But like you said, not knowing, and I'm glad I'm in the healthcare field, so I kind of know a little bit, but there's a lot of people out there that it's like, yeah, what's the difference between our nursing home and assisted care, assisted living,
right.
And such. So it's really important for that preparation. But, what I see a lot, and coming back a few decades sooner, or even in just regular doctor's appointments, what I see and hear, and what I saw actually in my brick and mortar, was that it was me as a functional medicine doc versus their primary care physician who was conventionally trained. And I didn't see it like that. I saw it as we're all a team for your health. Whereas I think sometimes healthcare can be very divided as far as how you heal. Do you heal with medications, or do you heal with lifestyle and, and supplements potentially,
Right.
And I think you can have it all. I think you can do both. And,
Exactly.
I thought a lot of patients were caught in the middle to the point where they felt very secretive as far as what we were working on.
Yep.
I also still see it now that I'm out of the brick and mortar and in the online space, a lot of people messaging me, commenting that, I want to figure out why I feel the way I'm feeling, but my doctor just keeps wanting to put me on medications, or my doctor's
Hmm.
not ordering lab tests for me, or my doctor's not listening to me, or I'm told they're normal and I just still don't feel good. Like all these things. And when I'm overall sense is like, I don't feel seen, heard, understood, listened um, cared for. Like there's a lot of, to the point where they either do nothing and have
Right.
to live with their symptoms. They don't feel empowered enough to go look for another doctor because I think they feel like they're going to get the same pushback, or they're trying to find their own answers online. So,
Right.
um, I guess, where do we even begin with that?
Right. Well, I think so you brought in so many
Yeah, I know.
interesting ways to take this. So first, when you were talking about heard and seen, I mean, as a patient advocate, I mean, I think it's even on my website. I talk about, you are the ultimate decision maker. You
Mhm.
have a right to be heard, seen, and valued. Your wishes, goals, thoughts, they matter.
Mhm.
And I've had traditional healthcare providers push back at me and say, let's be real. Is the patient really the ultimate decision maker? I'm going to use the term patient. Some people don't like
Yep.
that term, because sometimes it's family, right?
Mhm.
But the end user of the service,
Yep.
so which we're going to use the term patient, because here's what I see. You go to the doctor appointment, you go to an appointment, exchange of information is shared. Person goes out to the car, goes out to the bus. They're standing outside the appointment. Traditional care providers will tell me the insurance company decides care. The patient or the doctor, whoever wrote the prescription, decides care. Their finances will decide. And what I tell them is like, well, those are definitely factors that influence what's going to happen. And yet in that moment, the patient, to bring in a pop culture reference, is very much like Neo and has the choice for the red, or I believe it's the blue capsule, right? They're either going to go along with what they were told, the information that happened, they will follow through on a plan, or they won't.
Mhm.
And so they are the ultimate decision maker. And so, if all that information, all that time, that exchange of information just ends up on the dashboard or crammed in a purse or a backpack, and then
Mhm.
they don't do anything with it, what was the point?
Yep.
Even if there's a disagreement of how to progress,
Yep.
that needs to be addressed. And I think we're going to talk about that later, about setting the tone. How do
Yep.
we own that space?
Yep.
So that's the first thing I just wanted to bring in, that yes, I'm right there with you, heard, seen, valued. And you are your ultimate decision maker. Unfortunately, what that means is it's almost like we've shifted the failures of the medical system onto the person who
Mhm.
doesn't feel well, who's already emotionally stressed, physically stressed. We're telling them, you must make a decision now,
Yep.
right? Without the medical system saying, okay, is this an emergency? Like you're going to lose a limb if we don't do something now? Or does this mean it's urgent, but we could pull back 24 hours? Maybe we could pull back 7 days. Maybe it's an emerging situation. So that's the other piece. We're being forced to make these decisions because we're in the appointment, and that's going to decide where we end up in the workflow. And then the last thing I'll just bring here, because I don't want to, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many things. When you talk about the silos of traditional medicine and how, so I graduated 30 years ago, 93. Everybody was like,
Mhm.
medical is going to be a team-based approach. And you as the pharmacist or the medication expert, and you're going to be able to be on a team with a doctor and a nurse and physical therapy and OT, all these different people.
Yep.
And yet many pharmacists end up, and there's nothing wrong with it. I spent a decade at a Walgreens, and the number of people that came into me with acute situations, I was flabbergasted.
Mhm.
And so, but
Mhm.
the system silos us off in this one space. And so this mindset or connection in the community is that pharmacists, no medications, but we only follow that path of drug therapy. I
Mhm.
can tell you, I am about every tool in the toolbox. If it's holding a crystal, if it's mindset, if it's meditation, if it's how we eat, if it's a supplement or a medication. Medications make complete sense in an acute situation to allow us to have time to get our feet underneath us. I think it's a disservice, actually, if we have a person with, super high blood pressure. Maybe they have 4 children, they're working 2 jobs, and then we tell them, oh, you need to breathe and meditate. Okay, I do think we need to breathe and meditate. Yeah. And yet, if we're at a risk of a stroke, we need to have a pharmacological conversation until we can start weaving in those other pieces. And so I, as a pharmacist, talk about using our medication list instead of it as a fixed piece of paper with a list of drugs that says, I take drug A twice a day, for this condition. And a lot of people don't even know that, but they just have this static list. What if we go old school and think of the overhead projector, and our medication list is a transparency, and we overlaid that medication list on our life? And I'd be willing to bet you can start to connect the dots of, this is where I was stressed at work. This is where someone in the family got ill. This is when I stepped on a nail. And so you can look at when the medications come into the picture, and you can actually chart a person's wellness. And then you can start to see those other factors that are either supporting optimized health or are tearing them apart. And so, that just where my mind went with what you were sharing. There's so many different things that are going on.
I love that, and that's exactly the question I had of how to use that list, that medication list, as a tool to better your care versus like, a crutch of like, here's what I need to take, or like, this is what I've been given. It's like, okay. And, and using that as like, okay, if you find out it's connected to stress and you're at a point in your life, you can start managing that stress in a better way. Perhaps in the future that can come off your list.
Exactly. And that's the piece that I think that, as a pharmacist, and I did spend a lot of time in, like I said, so I'm board certified in geriatrics. I was a consultant in long-term care. So I went to anywhere from 8 to 13 nursing homes. I was in Connecticut. I would review somewhere between 1,000 to 1,300 medical records a month to make sure medication made sense. I would find errors all over the place, some with catastrophic consequences, because pharmacy care in that space is not what we would, again, think of in like a more acute hospital setting. And then I was faculty for 4 years, where I had a clinical practice site embedded in one long-term care facility. And as a pharmacist, it was always interesting that when we had people go palliative care, or when we had someone go into hospice, how many smaller aggravating complaints would start to go away. And it was because we were now deprescribing, a term we don't often hear of. A person gets prescribed a medication, and in that appointment, we may not ask, when does this drug come off? What is the goal for this drug? What should I expect? When should I expect it? 4 weeks, 4 months? And then once I reach that place where I'm no longer treading water and, in that acute mode, when I shift over into the chronic, when can we take that drug away? Well, in palliative care and hospice, we take them away in part because our focus of curing has shifted to more of this, quality of life, right? And if you can't swallow and we're now crushing 20 tablets and putting them in a tube, that's not quality of life for most people. And yet what we realize is there's a lot of side effects that were going on. And because the person is not on the medications, sometimes people would actually graduate off of hospice because the state they were in was pharmacologically based. Now, it doesn't happen all the time.
Wow.
And yet, if all of a sudden, they're not snowed, they're able to be awake, to visit with family when they need, and then we manage pain in a different way. Is there, there again, bring in every tool. And we do that in the hospice setting. And yet, so why can't we back that up? Why can't we start doing that when we're in our 40s, our 50s, our 30s? And I like to use an example because I think a lot of people are used to the commercials and it resonates. But there's a medication, Prilosec or omeprazole, for ulcers, is what it was for originally, but then it became, heartburn, gastroesophageal reflux. Those are the technical terms. And yet, now that it's over the counter, you can see people using these all the time. And in hospitals, they get prescribed and they don't get taken away. To your point, what if we were to look at that again, is that overlay, that transparency of what's going on in life?
Yeah.
Is it a dietary factor? Are they drinking too much alcohol before they go to bed? Do they have sleep apnea? Are they eating, spicy foods, fatty foods? Is there something wrong with the valve? Is it stress? Yes, the medication may make you feel better in the moment, yet we know those drugs have long-term consequences, but they're over the counter and you can get them at, you could probably get them at your local gas station.
Yeah, in a little travel size.
Yeah, in a little travel size. And so it's a broader conversation. And I know you're having that with your clients. And so as an advocate, as a patient advocate broadly, I mean, my lane is healthcare navigation and decision support. And yet, let's be real, I bring in 30 years of being a pharmacist. And so I can help navigate. I'm not going to tell you you should or shouldn't be on something. That would never be what I would do. No. I can say, we should be talking to your doctor about this, though. How do we have that conversation? And how do you own that space?
I love that. Yeah, because I think, two things that I was thinking of as you were speaking is, I think a lot of people go on medications thinking like, okay, there's just add that to my list forevermore, right? And they never think that they can actually come off of it. And there's medications like omeprazole. I think it's like you're only supposed to be on it at most, 3 months? Yeah. And there are people on it for years. I mean, there's certain circumstances where, yes, it's prolonged, but like for the run of the mill person with just acid reflux, it's not supposed to be chronically, for 3 years. I mean, I think it's like 3 months, and like no one reads a little fine print of how long you're supposed to take it. They just, now that's over the counter, it's like they pop it like it's candy,
Exactly.
And don't address like, why am I taking this? And that's, I'm absolutely on board with you. I'm against just prescribing a pill for every symptom, although that's how I was trained. I go back and I never bash docs or how we practice, because that's how I was trained too. It was like, I didn't know any better.
Right.
So, and how I was trained is symptom diagnosis, hopefully a prescription medication, because I feel better because I literally have 5 minutes with the patient, and hopefully she feels better because I know she's coming in with a symptom and wants to feel better. Right. So she's leaving with a piece of paper in her hand. I'm like, whew, I had a pill for that one,
Right.
And, what happens is sometimes this happened to my mom, 80 years old, a couple of years ago, called me, Brittany, I'm on 20 plus medications. I'm like, because you keep going to your doctor with these symptoms, and every symptom gets a pill. And when we went through the medication list, they're like 3 or 4 pills for the same symptom. I'm like, why are you on? And then others for side effects. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is why you end up with 20 plus, because doctors it's getting better with communication and cross electronic medical records, so doctors can see the different medications. But I think sometimes doctors get fearful of taking other prescribed doctors' medications off, and like, I don't want to step on toes. I don't want to take you off this. I don't want to do that. So unfortunately, the patient gets caught in the middle on a laundry list of medications that they think they're going to have to be on forever, and they don't feel like they can even ask to get taken off of them. So I think, perhaps if you want to take a different approach, don't go to your doctor with every symptom. Because I also had someone comment like, I want to do things more naturally, but my doctor keeps trying to push meds. I'm like, because it's probably 2 years later, you have the same symptoms. You're still not getting any better. So of course they're going to be like, just take the pill, I'm like, so perhaps if there's nothing critical, stay away from the doctor and do things the way you want to do them. Right. Like, doctors only doing what they know to do best. And I can say this because that was me for over 15 years, and and I do think, again, like you said before, there is a place for medication, especially in acute situations. Even if you have a plan of getting off, hopefully getting off some of these medications of conditions that are reversible, right? Because you want to change your lifestyle. That's great. But sometimes acutely you do need it to get over that hump. Right. And so like you said, it's not as much of a life-threatening, like, oh my God, I got to do this now.
Right.
Like, roll out the changes over time. So,
right. There's one thing I was just going to add there real quick. So when it comes, and it's interesting because providers are taught how to add medications. Providers are not taught how to stop drugs. Nope. And so I just want to make sure anybody who listens to this doesn't think, oh, well, I heard this podcast and these drugs I could stop. I could just stop. No, they're just
Nope.
the science that puts medications on. There is a science to take medications off, and it
Correct.
is really in the weeds and not the scope of this. And
Nope.
yet, someone like me who could work, depending on where you are, what's going on, because I do have pharmacist licenses in
Yep.
4 different states. There's a way to work with your healthcare provider
Yep.
to assess medications, because there will be conditions that will require 4 drugs. Somebody with heart failure
Yep.
very likely could be on 4 medications, and they may be absolutely reasonable at the state that they're in.
Correct.
And yet I have also seen medication errors where people didn't know the names of the drugs, and they've gone to different pharmacies when they were traveling and end up on 3 versions of the same medication. And now they're coming into my rehab facility because they had a knee joint replacement, and I'm doing this medication review, and I'm like, how did they end up on 3 drugs of the, 3 versions? And it was because they all had a slightly different name, but it was the same medication. And so the ability to decide when to add medications as a tool, I have no judgment. I'm agnostic, or I don't know what that would be, but you're like, I don't judge a tool.
Yep.
In the moment, in the crisis, if somebody, I'm a sailor and I'm a diver, if somebody is in the water and they're drowning,
Yep.
I don't look only for the flotation device that has the ring that says, throw this in a flotation device. I'm going to throw a shirt. I'm going to throw a Yeti cooler. I'm going to throw anything that floats.
Yep.
Because in that crisis, the tool, I don't care what it's called, if it floats and the person doesn't drown, that's the victory. And so in that acute moment, we're bringing on tools.
Yep.
And that can bother people, because there are people who do not want medication and they take it as a personal failure, or that, the doctor's going to judge me because they don't think I'm serious about my health. And as an advocate, that's where I work with mindset, because look, no, you are where you are today. Yep. And yet, whether we're looking at labs, whether we're looking at drug treatment, we have the power to change a lot. Even people that are towards the end of life, 80s and 90s, we now know that even, there's different ways to exercise to build bone mass and density and muscle strength. There's ways to claw back some of those skills that we lose, even if they can't, intellectually process it. And so it's not fixed. We're not static, frozen. We're dynamic. We as humans, we have a lot of tools, we can do a lot. And so we just have to look at it for where we are in this moment, and then set our sights on where we want to go.
Yep.
And with that in mind, how do we get me there?
Yep. Absolutely.
And if that involves a couple of medications, so be it.
Yep.
And if I can do it, by taking a food away or adding a food, thumbs up too.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. And with that, I mean, sometimes you're resisting the medication is going to take, it ends up coming back to bite you, because it's like, why, take it. It doesn't mean anything, like you said, about your health or about your motivation to take a different path with your health. It's just right now something you need to get you, again, I always say, over the hump. Like there's a lot of things get people over the hump on the other side, and then you can reevaluate, get out your list again and look, okay, why did I take this? And and again, like you said, we're not your doctor or your pharmacist. Please address this with your doctor. We are just kind of putting a little information out there so you can say, well, this is something I want to talk to my doctor about.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So let's kind of go back before you even have an appointment. You talked about the power of the pre-appointment preparation. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because as I said, my concern with healthcare now, when we tell folks, be your best advocate. And I talk to healthcare providers all the time that are advocating for family members. And I advocated for my mom when she had cancer and was passing away. My dad, he had a dementia, not a traditional type, but he had a catastrophic fall, fractured his neck. I mean, obviously, I was in the weeds with him. And so I love it when family is available to help advocate. And yet I also know, as a daughter who's been in that case, that's the healthcare provider, sometimes you're better served being the family member.
Yeah. And
if we can offload that to someone like me or whomever that has the bandwidth emotionally, maybe with background experience, that's something to consider. It's not failure. It's not that you don't love your family. It's not that you aren't intellectually capable, because some people are like, oh, I can Google, I can figure this out. Well, yeah, I mean, sure, you could probably plan a trip, around the world as well. But if you're not a travel agent, maybe that's not the best time value for your money. And so part of pre-appointment prep is knowing where you are, who you are, what you're willing to do and not. And it's okay. I happen to be part of the, American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So they have these pillars, like the 6 pillars, I believe, how you eat, sleep, breathe, move, think, staying away for bad substances. So there's a lot of like healthy living in that, right? And yet, if you need a medication, maybe you need a medication, right? So know who you are, what you're willing to do and not do, where kind of are hard stops. Explore why that's a hard stop for you. We just went through COVID. A lot of people had hard stops on vaccines, right? I'm not going to go on whether that's good, bad, what, but a lot of people had hard stops. So explore why you have a hard stop on something, right? Maybe there is some Googling involved. I'm not saying we don't. We have an amazing opportunity to explore the situation that we're in. And so maybe you would be online. I can tell you there are sites that have better evidence than those and those that don't. So if you are going to explore information online, understand how to assess the evidence that you're reading. And it also plays I also would say spend some time, as I said, whether you're on medications or not, reflecting, whether it's a diary, a journal, whatever word you like, and kind of map out what's been going on in life that is taking you into that appointment. Because you really need to know what the intention of the appointment is. It's really that adage, begin with the end in mind. Why are we scheduling the appointment? I shared with you, I recently had my annual well woman, appointment. In my mind, I knew I wanted to talk about hormone replacement therapy because my mom had, an aggressive rare form of breast cancer. Old research was like, don't touch hormones. New research is like, maybe not so bad. maybe the risk benefit, right? And so I wanted to have that risk to benefit conversation. So I had done my research. I had the appointment scheduled. I had the mindset around how I'm going to set the tone because I'm kind of rehearsing what it's going to be like because I know I only have 15 minutes and likely I'm going to be half naked under a paper gown at some point, which is not a position of power for many people. I may not know the person because this appointment was changed to a new provider last minute. And so I'm kind of doing this rehearsal and prep so that I know what I want out of that experience when I get in there. And so the appointment to me begins way before we even show up. So yeah, that's how I would view the pre-appointment prep.
Yep. I love that. And so, actually I was thinking about something when you stopped. I was like, wow, like how often are you going into your gynecological appointment and you are either getting questions asked when you're getting your pap smear done, which is a very vulnerable position to be in, or like you said, even in a paper gown, half naked. It's like, how willing are you to talk about hormones or what have you when not likely, like perhaps it would even be acceptable. Is that even a right word to say, ask if they could speak to the doctor with the clothes on, if that's something you don't feel comfortable doing, right?
Exactly. And as an advocate, that's the kind of thing. So like, let's say you have an advocate, right? And that advocate could be a professional like me, you bring me in and I'm, whether it's your battle buddy, because I don't like to look at it as war, but some people feel like it is. If it's just the person that you bounce ideas off, we work through what would I do ifs. We do this kind of coaching, before we walk in. Are we wanting to talk about something potentially emotionally triggering, right? Maybe there's other stuff going on so that the minute you walk in and you're in that vulnerable position, you're just going to shut down, even if you've done all this other stuff. So as an advocate, and maybe in that type of an appointment, you don't take the advocate into the room, but in many other appointment settings, you're allowed to have people, doctors, I talk to them all the time, will say, like, bring an advocate with you, family, friend, trusted advisor, professional, whatever. Maybe during the actual exam, obviously the person's not going to be in that room, but you could be in there before or after, right? And so to your point, when you get in there, oftentimes you're going through some kind of screening with a nurse, time out, hard stop, say, I would like to talk to the doctor or the provider about this.
Yep.
Can we do it before I take my clothes off?
Yep.
And if we have to explain why, maybe we do, maybe we don't. It depends. But I think if you go in with a clear, if there's like, I want to do this because I will feel more in control of, I'll be able to pay attention better, connected to a better outcome, right? I'll be able to hear what's going on in, with my questions, and follow up on that more appropriately because I'm not nervous of this. And if you do get pushback, maybe you have a decision, right? This could even be something that you talk of before you get there. If you have, you're able to send an email or set the appointment up differently, because let's be real, providers do make accommodations. They do it all the time. I saw it when people were leaving skilled nursing or assisted living, if they had dementia, or if they had other needs. They make accommodations for medical reasons. It just doesn't necessarily look so on that decision, when you're clicking push buttons on a digital form. But then maybe you end up going through the appointment. When you leave, you have a choice then. Many people have choices to decide, do we continue to go to that doctor? And I'm cautious when I say you have the right to fire a provider, because I also know there's a lot of people that live in areas where they don't have the luxury of a number of providers or resources, transportation. So again, the healthcare ecosystem can get incredibly murky for some. So I don't say that just like casually, oh, we'll fire that doctor and find somebody else. And yet, again, it is your health. It is your care. You have the ability to go back and talk to them and say, maybe after the appointment, I didn't like how that went. What can I do? Is there somebody I can talk to so that the next time I come in, or do it before we go in if we think we're going to get pushback? I mean, and I think an advocate can help you. Again, family, friend, trusted, professional, whatever that looks like. But it's owning what you know to be your right in that moment to help get the best care, because you want the best outcome. And if the environment is not going to set you up for success, how can we make that a win-win? And I think most providers want that.
Absolutely. I used to,
in 5 days,
exactly
the same problem.
I used to actually say that to my patients, like, though, especially those two scenarios. One, they would forget what I said because, either they're so nervous or they're thinking of the next question, or, they forget what they were going to ask me, kind of thing. So like, I'd always say, like, why don't you bring someone in, or if we're talking surgery, if we're talking whatever, bring someone else, because that other person who you've talked to, hopefully prior to the appointment, knows the questions you have. And, or when you leave, they can explain what I said because they heard it. They're not in that very, I don't want to say critical, like that position whereby like all attention's on you. They're over in the corner listening, right? Being that innocent bystander, like listening, like you said, an advocate, someone who knows your wishes, know what the questions you have, what you want, maybe even providing a little more of a backbone if you get pushback.
Exactly.
And not be sassy, not be disrespectful, but you are, this is a relationship, it's not a hierarchy, it's like you are there to get care, and your doctor is the best person to provide that care, but it's a conversation. And at the end of the day, you both want what's best for you. And, and maybe it's even like, leaving and getting back to your doctor or what have you, if you don't feel comfortable with the decision having to be made right then and there, as long as it's not critical, right?
Exactly.
But I think we think everything has to be resolved in that appointment, and maybe it is. I know it's hard to get a hold of doctors, and you call and you get the answering service, and you get the message, and don't get the message, they don't call you back.
Right.
We won't go all into that, but chances are there's a way of communicating your wishes even after the appointment, if you change your mind. So, and let's talk about setting the tone for the appointment, because I think, a lot of people, like, is it a conversation they have or journal? You kind of brought both of those up, like
Mhm.
before going in, because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I just had my annual today. And then they're like, literally on the way to the appointment going, oh, I want to talk about this and this and this and this and this. Really haven't thought about how they want to deliver that.
Right.
It kind of popped into their head because they've been so busy with everything else.
Yep.
And show up at the appointment, probably remember 3 of the 5.
Yeah.
And, are like rattling all these things. And your doctor's like, oh my gosh, like there's so much coming at me. It's like, obviously preparation is key. So like, I mean, how do we do this? Like, what do you
Right.
recommend we go about doing this?
Right. And that's where I feel that whether you're doing this solo or you're supporting someone or you have someone that's supporting you in that appointment, that's where setting the tone is so critical. So my father, I shared that he had, kind of an unique type of dementia.
Yep.
And then he was also diagnosed with prostate cancer at about the same time. So I went to his urology appointments with him.
Mm-hmm.
He was a pharmacist. He was a brilliant man. And dementia was really kind of, robbing him of some of that, being able to act for his best interest in a stressful moment. He could still remember the Steeler game the night before and he could problem solve, but he couldn't when he was put under stress. He would really just defer and say, yes, yes, yes. So we would do the pre-appointment prep. We'd talk about what it's going to be like. And the very first time we went in, we're meeting this new neurologist. We found out that he's got this cancer. I went into the appointment with him. His blood pressure is off the charts, but he's not on blood pressure medication, but he's anxious. So we had talked about that I have the Calm app. And so I put on, and I was showing him, I was like, Daddy, look at this app. Let's watch this little brook here. And he's like, oh, that's really interesting. He didn't know it was a meditation. I didn't tell him, let's do some breathing exercises. But as he's watching this, he's calming down and we're kind of looking around the room at the pictures on the wall. So we're setting the tone in this moment for my dad, for him to be able to have this appointment, which, let's be real, prostate, it's about as invasive as it's going to be for a woman in her annual, right? I mean, neither are positions. They're very vulnerable. And the first time we met the doctor, and I give the doctor so much credit, he walked in and he was like, oh, so I have 2 people with me today. This is fantastic. And he's like, and he spoke to my dad, 100% talking to my dad. I'm kind of on the sidelines, acting as scribe. I have my list of questions, as you can imagine, the daughter and everything that's going on. And then he's like, and, who are you? And I said, well, this is who I am. And he's like, fantastic. I love it when someone's in the room, to be here as support. And I said, well, I wanted to make sure that we said, well, I have a number of questions. And he said, I'm sure you do. And we'll definitely talk about that. And he said, I'd like to hear from, Mr. Jim, what would he like to talk about? And so when I think about that, how rare for a provider in a super busy appointment setting to talk to my dad first. And my dad, was concerned, am I dying? Because I heard the word cancer and, and what do I need to do? And basically, just to kind of close that piece out, he looked at my dad and he was like, the type of cancer is so slow growing, we don't even really have to worry about it. We will discuss what your goals are. And we can go a number of ways. Yes, cancer is always serious. And yet, he knew my dad's background. And so then he was like, so let's talk about these questions. And so I had my list.
Yep.
The most important one at the top, second, third.
Yep.
Dad, I would say, Daddy, do you have any questions? And he's like, well, you have that one on the list. Can you share that? And I was like, yeah. And so I would write it down and then we would kind of pause. It's hard when you only have 15 minutes. But I think within that first 30 seconds to 2 minutes, can we set the tone? Make sure that the provider knows that you are interested, that you're not scrolling, looking at your phone, that you're, that you're not part of the conversation, that you're prepared, because we have to recognize we have a finite appointment time. And so we do need to have a priority, of this and that. And then, but if we've done the pre-appointment prep, maybe we can kind of anticipate, well, if they say this, then this is where the question goes.
Yeah.
That can be hard if you're doing it on your own, particularly like in my dad's case, who didn't have the faculties to remember all this. That's when you really do need somebody else that can take those notes. And then just like you said, maybe act as backbone, maybe act as just the cheerleader in the room, whatever it is, the scribe. And then whenever the exams come, you leave the room, you know, and then you come back in when it's time. And so I think that when you're in that moment, you have to own again your right to be there. And I think that we forget that, that we are the reason that this whole thing is happening.
Yep.
And there's power in that.
Totally agree. And, you know, I think it's, as a daughter of elderly parents as well, I think it's great to assess their ability to go to appointments. You know, I started going to my dad's appointments, a long time ago. I don't even know how many years ago, because what I was finding is he was complaining to his doctor daughter a lot, me. And then he'd had a doctor's appointment. I call him after, say, how'd it go? Oh, fine. How would they do about this, this, and this? Well, nothing. What do you mean nothing? Because I didn't tell him about it. I was like, Dad, now we have to wait 6 more months or whatever. So I actually started going with his appointments. And every time he made a little comment, I would put it in my notes section of my phone.
Yep.
Because we all have busy lives, right? Like I get it. Like I might forget too. But when his appointment came and I started making his appointments around my schedule, or I'd alter my schedule, I would go with him and I'd sit in the corner like you. And, you know, when the doctor would come in, how's everything going? Oh, fine. I'm like, Dad.
Yeah.
You know, like, how's this? Oh, fine. I'm like, Dad, that's not what you told me. Oh, what did I say? And I'm like, let me bring up my notes. So he wasn't, you know, he wasn't trying to, and again, I was saying before we recorded, like he gets very intimidated by the doctors and he's there to have a good time, not to take care of his problems. And now it's more of a memory issue that we have to be there, but like he would not only not tell the doctor, but like the doctor would tell him to do things. He wouldn't remember that either. He'd come home with like, when are you supposed to go back? I don't know. I'm like, okay, we're going to start, you know, versus my mom, who has a partner who's very savvy with, you know, he's not in the healthcare world, but he listens, he takes notes. Right. So if you know, again, have an elderly parent who has someone like that, great. They can talk to each other because he's her advocate most of the time. But like a lot of times we do have elderly parents that may have a partner with dementia or other memory loss, or just they go to their appointments and nothing gets done because they don't think, like they just rather complain when they're home.
Right. And I think I really appreciate you bringing that in there, because while my dad had this amazing experience with the urologist as a daughter, I wasn't living in the same state as my dad, you know, in the 10 years. I was actually living overseas for some time, and then I was back in the US. But, you know, before we found out this other stuff was going on, I would often joke that he and his primary care doc had a pact, because, you know, he would call me up and say, well, these were my labs. I must be fine. The labs are good. Right. And so I was like, well, did you ask about like any of this other stuff? And he's like, well, no, why would I? And I was like, well, because you got your 15 minutes, Dad. Now he knew his doc for years. My dad, like I said, was a pharmacist. He'd known that doctor for probably 40 years. I'm trying to think how long, maybe 40 years. I mean, they'd had this relationship. They were about the same age. They would go in, and I'm sure those appointments, knowing my dad, were probably what you just described. Hey, doc, how's it going? You know, and if he didn't bring anything up, if he did, you know, the basic, you know, are you falling? Are you sleeping? You know, your labs look okay, you know, see you next year. Now, where this ended up failing us, and I can tell you, I wish in hindsight, I had visited a couple of appointments just to get like a lay of the land, right? I didn't, you know, Dad was still 100%, but it would have been, I feel, better, because we ended up with a situation where we had a specialist who wanted to do an invasive procedure the day before Thanksgiving, because there was a wound that wasn't healing. And I said, well, why are we doing this invasive procedure? Again, I'm not a doc, but why are we doing an invasive procedure when I can go online and it says, these are the 4 options of what we could do before we ever get to the invasive procedure? Like, why are we immediately going the day before Thanksgiving of all things? Because then, of course, if something goes sideways, you know, this is the last thing I need, you know, is something critical, or what if he passes, you know, like worst case. So we called the primary care doc up, and I thought, oh, this is going to be fantastic. I've known this doctor for decades, because
Yeah.
again, in our community. And we get in there, and I explained what was going on. And I said, I'm curious, are you able to talk with the doc? Maybe we can all get on the phone together.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't we doing a Doppler? Why aren't we doing ultrasound? Why aren't we doing these other things? Because the wound is healing. It's just not as quick as maybe we would like. But let's be real. It's on a foot, a toe, other clinical stuff. And he just looked at me and said, that doctor's the expert. I have a good relationship with him, and I don't want to jeopardize that. Mm. And so if you don't agree, you can call back. And I thought, wow, there were many ways he could have said that without basically saying,
he's my friend and I don't want to,
he's my friend and I don't want to piss him off. Peace out. You're on your own.
Yeah.
And I mean that. And so would I have picked that up in other appointments? I don't know, but it did make me in that moment. One, I felt betrayed by the system. I mean, anger, I've been pissed at the system. I've been, I've been disappointed. I've been surprised, but betrayal, I had not felt. And it made me then go back and look at all the other things that had been happening for a decade and going, I wonder if, even just once or twice, if I could have gone in and asked questions before my dad was older, because, I mean, he was still walking the golf course, but if you're in geriatrics, they often talk about the first thing you should do is look at a person's foot because, the feet will tell you how well a person is doing, and so, did he ever look at my dad's feet? I know this is going a little, but there's just ways that I'm like, wow, did I screw up? And did I let my dad down? Because on the surface, everything looked good. And so I think that it's something to be mindful of, that we all benefit from second opinions, or just someone looking around, because in the moment we are focused on, the question immediately at hand, and we drop the ball, we forget.
Yep. And this can pertain to, geriatric parents or siblings that are going into an appointment that might, have information that's a little touchy or whatever, or they feel like they're going to go ask for something that's going to, like you said before, like they need an advocate there to help them.
Right.
But the only other thing that came to my mind as you were speaking is probably about 3-4 years ago, my dad developed diabetes. And of course, I'm in functional medicine. I know all the lifestyle things. Like, I'm like, oh, okay. And I honestly, let's go back even further. About 10 years ago when I got into functional medicine, I'm like, okay, Dad, let's do your labs. Let's get you on some supplements. Let's make sure you eat right. Yeah, we did his labs, and that's as far as it went, because I wanted for him something he didn't want.
Yep.
And then he developed diabetes, and then was non-compliant with his meds. And I was like, really trying, like every time I was there, starting to develop some memory issues. And maybe it was selective because I was talking about healthy food and not his cereals and his, peanut butter and crackers.
Right.
And I came to one appointment with him, and his doctor pulled me out of the room, and she said, you know what? He's at this point, 77, 78, let him be. He obviously doesn't want to change his diet. He may not even want to take his medication. We can keep trying, like, just let him be. And part of me was like, so you're giving up on him, kind of thing. But then part of me was like, well, I mean, he knows what he's doing. I think I've been preaching at him long enough. I can't want for him something he doesn't want. And that's when I stopped preaching the diet. I stopped preaching, giving things up. She's like, he's 77. He doesn't want to give up his peanut butter and crackers and his cereal and all the things. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So it's a hard pill to swallow when you have a loved one where you want something different for them, but they don't want it. And they have to want it too, to be able to sustain whatever the change may be, even taking a medication. We talk about medications, like you didn't want to take that medication, even though it's control his blood sugars. He is a big pill, and it didn't make his belly feel good. So he didn't take it, so I left that appointment feeling very defeated, like as a daughter, like, oh, I could have served, here I am going to appointments here. I do this type of medicine and I can't even help my own dad.
Right.
And here we are a couple of years later, and, now looking at assisted living, but I think his feet are good. I think he's got pretty good looking feet. So
that's excellent. And, I mean, I can imagine how difficult that was for you. I had those I had those moments as well. And I think as daughters and, with loved ones, and we love them. I mean, my dad was my person, I would have jumped in front of, I think I would have jumped in front of a bullet for him, because of just, he was my world. And yet, like you just said, if knowledge was enough, we wouldn't have doctors who smoke and drink and we're overweight, right? And so we have to recognize again that we are autonomous. We are our own selves. And so is our family, right? And so I was throwing Sudoku and crosswords and dot to dots and memory games at my dad for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, look, I'm fine. And but you were taking in your space of functional medicine with diabetes. You knew what that progression looked like. Mm-hmm. I knew in long-term care, all it takes is one fall and you live in a split level ranch. This does not go well because we won't be making choices in a position of power. We're going to be behind the power curve and you may not end up where you like. And so, right, we do have to have those conversations, and it's not just with older people. I've talked to people where, this, crisis and the unexpected can happen at any stage. At any stage, it can happen with pediatrics. It can happen with teenagers. I think that there's lessons to be learned from this, regardless. I mean, we have skewed towards older people. But for me, making sure that my husband knew what my expectations are, because I don't have children, and it's like, this is how I want to go out. If it comes to this, I do not want you worried about what I'm going to wear at my funeral, like when I'm buried, because I'm not going to be buried. Let's just be very clear about my expectations. I don't want you to go through that. And so I think that these conversations are important at any stage. And if we're solo, there's a lot of people that are aging solo. Even if you're in a couple, if one person's not there at some point, who's going to be your support network, right? And help you with those situations if you are alone. And so I think that there's a broader conversation there. And I think that that's where particularly we have to be mindful of, are we taking our goals and our wishes into that? And when do we just pull back?
Yeah. So it was a wake-up call for me. And so I'm just sharing it because I think there's a lot of people, maybe they're on their health journey listening to this, or but they're dealing with outside things, whether it be their own health, whether it be loved ones. And it's just a lot of aha moments that I and you've both had, and maybe someone else could be like, oh yeah, that's a good point. So before we wrap up, I just want to add, you also do travel, health, and wellness planning. I've never heard of somebody doing that. What exactly is that?
I'm glad you brought it up. It's actually the word. It's interesting. The word passion has never really resonated with me. I'm not a passion-driven person, but I get super psyched about stuff. And I love to travel. I'm a diver and a sailor. And so my life has really been driven by travel. My mom was an active traveler, and this idea of travel, health, and wellness really started 30 years ago. 20 years ago when she was diagnosed with her cancer, because she loved to travel, and yet she was given this 6 weeks to live. And she ended up defying the odds. And throughout her health journey, she kept talking about, well, do you think I can go and start traveling again? And I'm looking at her and I'm going, this is going to be fascinating. Lifetime maximums of some of these treatments and, very touch and go. And yet she wanted to get back on the road. And so we did a lot of things right. We did, and she did. Our first trip was to Disney. I thought a couple of times we might have killed her because she did not look good. She was very frail. Her immune system was compromised. And yet for 4 years, we ended up going to 6 different countries. She came over to Germany where I was living. We went to the homeland, to Poland, and we had these amazing experiences. And it really reminded me of that connection for how travel takes us beyond some of that immediate situation. And I didn't do anything with it. I just knew it was powerful. And then when my dad was diagnosed with dementia, I was like, okay, I saw the benefit of having those memories with my mom that were not only of hospice and end of life, but of her wandering off in Belgium or eating ice cream on the Champs-Élysées. And so how do we make this work for my dad? Now, I had a lot more experience. I had my geriatric background. And so my dad was traveling for quite some time with us, but we were doing a lot of problem solving and setting us the environment up for traveling successfully before we ever left. And quite frankly, when people are dealing with these complicated medical challenges, one, they can sideline themselves too soon because they just think the level of effort is too much and I don't want to be a burden. I'm going to slow you down. That time has passed. I wanted to go, but I can't go anymore. I think I'd beg to differ. You can get dialysis in some pretty amazing places. I've seen a lot of opportunity out there. And so people who self-segregate or sideline, that's one group. Or the other group is, they're like, damn the torpedoes, we're just going to go. And they end up creating all this stress around them because everybody else is worried that at any moment they're going to drop, right? Of how do we make this successful and enjoyable for everyone? So I started looking at travel, health, and wellness. And how do we support people that have complicated medical profiles? Maybe they want to travel internationally. How do we define travel? Travel changed for my dad. In the beginning, it was going to the beach and making those memories to be able to bank them for, if he lived a very long time with dementia at the end, where maybe that's not we wanted to be able to balance those memories. And then over time, the version of travel changed. Maybe it's just taking an extended trip and looking at the leaves change, right? And so how do we provide people with the tools, the resources, the confidence to be able to still live full lives? And if travel's part of it, until the end, whatever that is, until they choose to step off and that, they have other goals. And so, travel, health, and wellness planning is something that I love to talk to people about. And so that we can, make sure we have memories that span all seasons of life. None of them are inherently better or worse, but I like having ones that bring those happy memories. My niece, after my dad died, first person she ever lost, really, that she knew. She was young. She was probably 15, I think, 16. And she's, weepy, thinking about Gigi being gone and, how she misses him, that he's not sitting in his chair. And within a couple of minutes, though, we're all laughing because she's like, but do you remember when we took him to the beach and he was watching the dolphins and eating pretzels? And so the sadness and the grief, which is absolutely valid, bookended with the dolphins and that of seeing my dad in his full, I don't know what you call it, the fullness of life.
I love that. Yeah, that's amazing that you do that because I do think a lot of people think, oh, I have this illness now, I'll never travel again. I've seen that over and over in my family.
Yep.
So it's amazing that you give that back to people that they can still travel and you just help them navigate that travel and figure out what the other end of the travel is going to look like as far as their health and wellness goes. So that's amazing that you do that. So I had to pick your brain because I was like, I've never seen it. I was like perusing your website. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
I do my best work trolling.
That trip that we took with my dad to the beach, I think we had 3 families traveling. And I believe there were 12 people. So different families, not just us. And I think that 2 people on the spectrum, children. So we had, older with dementia and complicated medical profile, children on spectrum, different families. And so, we all talked before we went and set very clear expectations of what this travel experience is going to be. And how do we always have, we called it eyes on Gigi, without it making it look like we were hovering. Yeah. Because that would have driven him nuts.
Yeah. Wow.
And so we kind of did like one of these tag your it. If somebody was sitting on the back porch for a while with dad, and then someone wanted to get in a drink, someone else would just kind of organically go out to the back porch. And we let him say where he wanted to be and go, and do. We also made sure that the building was something that he could navigate.
Mm-hmm.
It had an elevator in it. He had a 0 entry shower. We made sure that it met, what we hoped would be his needs. You can never know everything, but we made sure to the best of our abilities that we had a plan. And then we knew, like, what is the medical system like where we're going to be? I mean, we're an hour and a half outside of Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm.
If we need an urgent clinic, where is it? And if people want to go overseas, what does that complexity look like?
Mm-hmm.
Not every country, if you're getting cancer treatment, and let's say you're on high dose opioids for pain control, not every country allows large quantities of opioids in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we work that problem?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's something on the side that I enjoy, just like, what can we do?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I got sick in Aruba once, and I'm again, never figuring that you're going to need to go to the hospital, but I did. I was like, where's the hospital? Like, it's interesting navigating the Dutch healthcare system when you're 103 fever and like, you feel like crap. And they're like, oh, you're not an infant. You're not in a geriatric. Here's the prescription for things that are not FDA approved in the US. Take them. Feel better. It's like, where's my IV fluids? Right. But the point being, like, if I was elderly, had other problems, perhaps maybe I wouldn't even go to Aruba. I don't know. But although they have a good healthcare system, if you have they sell me as a young, healthy person. So like, they're like,
right. Yeah.
But,
it's the awareness. It's problem solving before you go.
Exactly.
It's very much what I do as a patient advocate. I just add that, I've traveled extensively. I've lived overseas, and that other problem solving piece, and maybe it doesn't make sense if you have diabetes, and you have wounds on your feet, or your feet are kind of raw, to go into a river and give an elephant a bath. I just happen to know someone who did that as an excursion because they went and worked with these elephants in this river. So if you've got a compromised immune system, I would not think that that's what you would want to do. I'd also, if you have a compromised immune system, would question walking barefoot on US beaches. Because there's bacteria in the sand. That doesn't mean you can't go to the beach. It just means we have to think through what we're doing.
Well, and I think that just level of thinking, the next steps are just things that we don't think about, like, and then until you either do something and you're like, oh, crummy, I shouldn't have done that. Right.
Wow. That's the smartest thing.
Yeah. Wow. So like, we have covered all topics here. Like,
a 2-part podcast.
I'm telling you. Just ending, quick question on a personal note, because we're taking care of everybody else. Now we want to know a little bit more about you as we wrap up. Do you have routines, like a morning routine and an evening routine?
It's interesting because we talked about this before. I am part of the lifestyle medicine group. I'm all about the pillars. And yet I can tell you, I dropped the ball on being consistent with the pillars. So my approach, the answer to your question, no, I don't have a routine, except for I am very specific with what I eat, because we do have diabetes in our family. At one point, 8 people had diabetes. Recently, another family member lost a foot. So I am hyper aware of diet. And I still will eat bread and things like that, although I'm very strategic with it. But I wish I need to be better, because as a solopreneur, as an advocate, I find myself really jumping in sometimes and completely losing time and track. And so things like sleep, exercise, I do them, but they're in spurts. And so it is something that I am constantly reminding myself.
Well, but you do, and I think I love that you define, like, I think everyone thinks routine, like get up and do the same thing every day. And I've had guests like that don't do anything, looks very different every day, especially if they have little kids, always have the core, like 2 or 3 things that they do. And then other things are variable. My previous guest, she gives movement in every day, even though she doesn't have a morning routine. Like, she makes sure she gets some movement some way. She doesn't like structure either. So, I love, like, even those of us in the healthcare world, like, I mean, you can think everyone has a structured morning routine. And that's why I asked this question, because there's a lot of really successful people out there that are healthy that don't necessarily have that morning, like, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful. I think everyone's like, you're not going to be successful if you don't wake up and do this. I'm like, okay.
The 5 a.m. club.
Yeah. I'm like, it looks different for everybody. Right. And we're not, and what someone's able to do on a consistent basis. And for you, it's your nutrition, right? Like
Yes.
that is what your routine is. Like, I know that this is when I'm I'm able to be most consistent with right now at this stage of my life. Right.
Exactly.
And you have a vision of how it's going to look different in the future, but it's coming.
Exactly.
Right.
And I will. And the other thing, like you mentioned the movement, I bought a mini trampoline or a rebounder, and I find that I can achieve 3 pillars on that. I can laugh, breathe, and exercise.
There you go.
And so like throughout the day, I just go jump or bounce.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm like, okay, maybe not flawless, but let's check some box off and give myself a high five for acknowledging that. And so I think, like you're saying, it can be woven in different ways.
Absolutely. And, not judging, it doesn't look like I don't have a trampoline, but I have a treadmill. So like, that's my, I'd be afraid of falling off a trampoline, to be honest. Final question. What is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew 5, 10, or even like 20 years ago?
I think I would, I know what it is. I wish I would have felt comfortable asking for help and acknowledging that asking for help or support or whatever you want to call it is not weakness. And I think that, whether I'm Gen X, whether it's just the way I was brought up, my family, like I said earlier, Polish, Russian, Ukrainians, very much self-starters. I think I would have been better served if there were times where I said, hey, I need to step off this ride and I could use some help. And instead I just gutted through it. And that ended up destroying me physically, which is how I ended up, finally just saying, I can't be a traditional healthcare provider anymore. This does not align, and I will not survive long-term if I keep this up. And it would have been nice to have given myself that space and grace at 25, 35. I'm now at 54 at any point along the way.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's something I learned as well. So I'm glad you said that, because I'm much happier now in the online space, but not asking for help, thinking you're superwoman, having to do it all. Like you said, calling yourself like a failure and I'm not good enough, or I'm at this because I didn't do all of the things. Not true. Not true.
Right.
Well, thank you. Where can my audience find you?
So I'm not the best at social media, but I am there. So I have a website, and I believe you could put it in show notes. My company's name is Wayfinder Advantage. On Instagram, it's Dr. Andrea Leschak. So social media, I'm in all the different spaces, but most people find me through word of mouth, things like this. Facebook a little bit, but Wayfinder Advantage is the name of my company. And I'm always looking to connect with folks. And I do offer a complimentary, let's meet and chat to see if advocacy aligns. Conversation.
Got it. Love that. Love that. Yeah. So I just love what you do. And I think there needs to be more of you out there, but
I need to be found, because a lot of people don't know that advocates exist.
I know. You're like the first one that is officially doing this, like out there. And it's like, when I found you, I was like, wow, we need to talk, because there needs to be more people out there that know, number one, that they can ask for what they want, but number two, there's someone there to help them navigate, what exactly do I want? Right. So that's you. So thank you so much. Yeah. We'll make sure all your information's in the show notes. If it's not linked in the app, it links to my website. So we get it all in there. So don't you worry.
Thank you so much for everything. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're amazing.
Yeah. So are you. So thank you. And with that, I'm out of here. Talk to you again soon.